name is Paula Dunn and welcome to the limited edition leadership show. Today on the program, I'm really excited to have Jodi Sampson. He's the Managing Director of Jodi Sampson Services, and Jodi specifically helps bridge the gap between business, government and community. And I'm also delighted to say that he's also part of my Leadership Advisory Board. So let's welcome Jodi.
Thanks, Paula. And look, I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of country whose land on which I'm dialing in from, which is the Kombumerri people of the Yugambeh speaking language speaking nation up here on the Gold Coast, and also acknowledge the country that you're on as well, elders and emerging, and wherever anyone else is dialing in.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jodi. So Jodi, please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you bridge the gap between all these communities.
Well, my story started in Moree in New South Wales, where I was brought up, and my Aboriginal bloodlines comes from both my mum and dad, and I've since reconnected with my country whenever I can, and even though I've been away from Moree and my country for about 30 years now, or a good part of 30 years, which pretty much shows my age. I started from humble beginnings. I have lived in a tent on the riverbank as a young baby. We had dirt floors. We didn't have electricity or anything like that. Mum and dad, both workers. Whenever there was any work, both mum and dad would jump in with, hands and feet, and didn't even have to think twice about reasons why they wanted to go to work. When it was available, they did it. And I mean, we're talking about I guess the 50s and 60s, which was the prime of their time. But raising two kids wasn't easy. Especially during those turbulent years, where we had segregation, we had racial colour bars, in public places. We had mission managers that were put in place on our reserves, which was absolutely disgusting, for human beings to experience, and also especially being First Nation Australian. So for me, that's where life began for me. Through my bloodlines too, I have connections to Cherbourg in Queensland up here, and that's from my mother's bloodlines. And my father is originally from a small Aboriginal mission just outside of a little village called Karoona. It's known as Walhollow Reserve, and what you would have found and still find today is we've got these discrete communities that have been established due to the government, and where you've got Aboriginal people still living there and raising families there. And so fast forward 2020, I've since experienced a public service career in 3 levels of government. In 2 states. I've worked for peak non-government organisations, and I'm a scholar on life education. I left high school at year 10 with really no clue what I wanted to do, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I wanted to embrace the Leadership Advisory Board role with No Limits Consulting, because life isn't all about education as such, formal education. And, there is also life experiences out there. And I think these young ones today, if they have an even balance of life experience and formal education, well, then the world's still their oyster, no matter whether they're a studier or, embracing education, or whether they're just wanting to get out there and work and use their hands. And, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're good with our hands. We have a good understanding of, what life's all about. But we're also balancing, an Aboriginal Australia and Torres Strait Islander Australia culture, as well as Western society. And so for us, we've got to have an extra ball in the air, if you like, to juggle.
Yes.
And, you know, we've got such a beautiful culture that really needs to be shared and embraced and celebrated, being the oldest living and recorded culture and studied culture in the world. I regard our culture as the eighth wonder. And,
oh, lovely. Yeah.
You know, and I think if other Australians embraced us, you know, no matter what their backgrounds, I mean, we're in an era now of reconciliation. And, you know, we as First Nations Australians, we want to move on with our lives, but we can't do that without recognition. And so, you know, what's happening in, I guess, from our perspective, what's needed for us is that formal recognition in Australia's Constitution, because that's been taken away, it's been dismissed for many, many years. It's 2020. I'd like to pass on knowing that my grandchildren, you know, are recognised as First Nations Australians and embraced. So
it's very interesting flavour. And just for the viewers, I met Jodi initially on LinkedIn, and I can't recall what prompted me, but there was something in Jodi's in his messages that he was posting on LinkedIn and the way he held himself that drew me to him. And so out of that we became connected, and then we started a conversation over the phone. And that's the reason, one of the reasons why I connected with Jodi immediately on the phone was because even though he was going through some, I guess, generational challenges from the 1950s and 60s, I could also relate based on my parents who've come out from Europe as migrants to Australia in the mid 1950s, when assimilation was actually, you know, was mandatory, and they still had the White Australia policy as part of the laws, and also, you know, when my parents became naturalised, they were called New Australians, so they weren't even just Australians, they were called New Australians. So I think Jodi and I kind of resonated with that kind of sort of similarity yet difference in our upbringing and our past, our parental beliefs, I guess, that were passed on. And so part of what I do in my business is helping teens rediscover their identity, rediscovering who they are, you know, how they see themselves, how they want to be seen, and how they're seen by other people. So if we drill down deeper, it's going into their own set of beliefs. You know, what do they believe about themselves, or what have others told them about themselves that has become their truth, which may not necessarily be their truth, but it's someone else's truth. So it's looking at the unconscious and conscious biases that are at play, and those intergenerational biases and beliefs that are passed on to us and the next generation. So I think, you know, it's a really timely reminder and a really great opportunity now to have this discussion together, because, you know, as we're trying to bridge the gap between the First Nation Australians and the rest of us, it's you know, understanding those past beliefs. Like during that time, that was their beliefs, and their beliefs were truths and were what was right. But looking back, like looking now at what our beliefs are and our new truths, we wouldn't think twice to do that sort of thing again. So I guess in a positive way, there's a lesson learned approach that we've learnt as going through different generations. But yeah, so it's understanding how we can change that behaviour. So change the shifts, which is what you're trying to do, Jodi, is bridge that gap by behaviour modification, behaviour change, by changing people's beliefs, people's perceptions, people's biases of the misconceptions of what people think Indigenous Australians actually are. And if I may say, from a spokesperson who's the white Australian, is that, to be honest, I also grew up with certain perceptions of the Indigenous population as well, you know, that were passed on. And, you know, I think having met you and having, you know, really developed a solid solid relationship with you really opened my eyes to the difference of what and how wonderful and colourful the Indigenous Australians actually are in enhancing our culture today.
Absolutely, and there's been a lot of market testing out there in the tourism industry, where tourists, have been, surveyed and asked the question, what has drawn you to come to this country? And 80% of people that actually leave here have said that they originally came here hoping to get an Indigenous or a First Nations Australians experience. And unfortunately, only 20% leave this country with that experience. Yeah. And so, it's a catch-22 where, politically, we're still, fighting for recognition so that then we can then assume our sovereign rights to our own country. And in a Western world, there's advantages for, bringing people from other countries here, because it boosts the economy. It supports not only business people, but also community people as well, because they're getting, a diverse cultural mix of people coming here, sharing stories, creating friendships, some long-lasting friendships, and even, business connections. So, we've got sister cities, that we talk about, especially in a local government sense. And, if all efforts were placed into bettering or enhancing the relationships locally with First Nations Australians, I think we'd have a lot more harmony in community, and also an identification of who are the local people within each of our communities, and how do we engage, with First Nations Australians. And that's where I come in, and there's many other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander consultants out there to shine the light, to show the way, show, what cultural safety is all about in making that engagement, and highlighting some instances where there's some, beautiful people there that are within networks that are just sitting there waiting to be introduced. And all it could take is a conversation. And so when I deliver my cultural immersion and Aboriginal cultural safety programs to groups and corporates and business sectors, government and business sectors, a lot of people say, is that all it's going to take? And I talk about examples of how they can, get to find out who the local people are. The many organisations that exist or responsible for a particular community. All it could take is an appointment over the phone, or even walking off the street to an organisation and say, I'd like to have a yarn with you about, the local people here.
Okay, so if I was a corporate, and I noticed that you're also certified as an Aboriginal mental health first aider, so which is fantastic. And so how would you, how would you support a corporate in terms of bridging the divide?
There's a couple of ways that I have done this previously. I've got clients, obviously, since going into business full-time 2.5 years ago, where I have either recommended a cultural immersion program first, and that could be a 1-day, a 2-day program, depending on, what the actual needs are of that organisation.
Would they specifically have? Sorry about this.
Right.
So if they were in a corporate situation and they're calling upon you for a cultural immersion workshop, would they technically be having cultural issues within the organisation, or can it be also an understanding of the Indigenous culture in more detail?
Well, it could be either engagement or healing, depending on the situation. I think it's important to first understand the intent of the business or the corporate client,
yes,
and how far they're wanting to take the relationship or, the program itself. And because let's face it, there's probably three connections here, you know, to engage with a client for me, and that is cultural immersion / cultural safety, to be able to engage and know how to engage. B would then be potentially, you know, an Aboriginal mental health first aid program, and it could be from either a one-day program, then advance into a 2-day program. And after that process, depending on their intent, then I might be able to sit down with them if they're willing and their intent is 100% pure to take it to the full extent. I can also assist and support them in developing a reconciliation action plan, which is all about things like employment strategies, so attracting people to their organisation as an employer of choice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It could be also branching off if they have Aboriginal procurement opportunities, showing them how to, you know, establish those sorts of relationships as well. And, you know, there would be links to the likes of Supply Nation, which is a huge organisation that has a bank of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses, and also linked to Reconciliation Australia, who are the organisation, the peak body for registering a reconciliation, or a RAP is what it's known as.
There you go.
Yeah, so there's linkages there. It all comes down to what the needs are. Any prospective client.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot to bridge the gap for a reconciliation on a local level. So it's like, you know, and the amount of people that you're going to influence on a national level, which is fantastic. Have you conducted any of these types of cultural immersions or Aboriginal mental health first aid in high schools yet?
Well, it's funny that we're talking today. As of Friday, I became qualified in delivering what's called a Deadly Thinking youth program, and so that's focused on 12-year-olds up to 25-year-olds. And it's all about recognising the signs and symptoms of what mental health or mental illnesses are, signs and symptoms, and also where to go to for help. So for anyone that's you know, wanting to engage, I'm not only qualified through Rural and Remote Mental Health, which is an Australian-based organisation, but also Mental Health First Aid Australia. I'm accredited through them as well to either deliver a 1-day program or a 2 or 3-day program, depending on where the organisation's at. And I have delivered these for the last 2.5 years, and wanting to get more into the youth space as well now that I'm freshly trained, and you know, I don't want to be a victim to the old scenario of, you know, use it or lose it.
That's so true.
You know, with knowledge, you either use it or you lose.
Absolutely.
Lose it. You know?
Absolutely. So, look, I love what you're doing, and like I said, you know, we connected several years ago, and I'm very passionate. Like, I love what you're doing, and it's really exciting to hear that you've now got this new Deadly Thinking accreditation under your belt too. So we need to have a deeper discussion on that.
Absolutely. And look, and I'm also performing some mentoring and coaching as well, where, you know, I've got young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander vocational education and training learners that are under a traineeship or an apprenticeship. So I'm in the trenches, but I can also be, you know, 34th floor of whatever building, you know, walking the talk up there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can attest to Jodi's mentoring. There have been times early on in my business that I've been needing a bit of guidance and support, and someone to lean on. And Jodi was, you know, has been always there, offering me that father-like, you know, sort of pep talk that I needed to just pick myself off the ground and keep going.
Absolutely. Well, I had to ask those hard questions sometimes, you know, about, you know, where are you at, Paula? You know, and I'm not frightened, you know, of doing that, because sometimes that could be all it takes to either draw out information from people on, you know, what they're experiencing, and then repack that with, hey, here's a phone number of someone that I think could help.
That's
or
it.
tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think there's a bit of a bias. Well, this is what I call proximity bias in terms of when you're always hanging around the same type of people, or the parents. Parents obviously know their children 100%. They know what they're like and this and that, and the educators or teachers in which the kids sort of go to class, and sometimes that proximity bias can hinder a child's development, because you need that, like they say, it takes a village to raise a child, and sometimes you need that external influence or perspective of someone else that may see things differently, that may assist that child in taking that next step, that they need to develop their human potential. So I'm all for having mentors and coaches in my life, and I wish I knew about them sooner when I was younger. I don't think they existed back then. So I think they're a really great alternative to counsellors and psychologists, especially if you don't really need to go see those types of people, and you want something more in terms of taking your career to another level or your studies to another level and reach your highest potential. So,
absolutely.
So if people want to find out more about you, Jodi, and what you can do for their business, their organisation or their schools, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on Instagram or LinkedIn, and if they look out for Jodi Sampson Services, they can find me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram. My email address is jodisampsonservices@hotmail.com. And my mobile number is 0412 439 771. Well, watch this space, because look out 2020 after COVID, because I'm coming.
Sounds fantastic. Look, it was an honour and a pleasure to have you here. And for all the viewers at home, I hope you really enjoyed our discussion today with Jodi. He was very candid and very open about his experiences and what he's doing for the community to bridge the divide. And if you really enjoyed this episode, please like and share it amongst your socials. And don't forget to be you, have courage, and live life without limits. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.